How's it going, Star Seekers? My name's Luke and welcome back to the channel for another review, where today we're going to be taking a look at Port Royale 4. It's a strategy simulation game which combines trading, resource management and city building with turn-based naval warfare, and sees you managing one of 4 colonial powers as they vie for supremacy over the 17th century Caribbean seas. Now, if you played the previous Port Royale games or any of the tropical games, then you're likely to have an idea of what to expect from this one. But for those who haven't and are looking for a deep strategy game to pump plenty of hours into, Port Royale 4 might just fit the bill. In this review, we're going to be taking a look at its gameplay and mechanics, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, and let's get into it. So Port Royale 4 is published by Calypso Media Group, a company well known for their strategy titles, and the game released last year on Steam but has recently been ported to Switch, where it's available for £49.99 on the UK eShop and $49.99 on the US eShop. Now, the game is set in the 17th century around the Caribbean islands, and it follows the colonisation of these areas by the 4 powerful nations of Spain, England, France and the Netherlands. The game's campaign mode sees you playing as each of these nations as they battle over land resources and the seas, and while there isn't so much of a story per se, each campaign does offer its own set of objectives for you to follow, which does kind of steer you in a specific direction and features interactions between the different nations. Now, upon starting the game, I highly recommend that you first work your way through the game's tutorials, as there's quite a lot to learn in Port Royale 4. To give you an idea of just how much, the tutorials alone will take you about an hour to complete, and while they do teach you the basics such as town development, convoy management, trading and naval battles, you're still going to have to learn a lot when you actually get into the game, but there is an extensive manual which will help you out a little. Now, considering the game's depth, I'm not going to be getting into the nitty-gritty details in this review, as would likely be here all day, but I will cover off all the general gameplay mechanics, so at least you have an understanding of how it plays. So Port Royale 4 has 2 gameplay modes, the first of these being the campaign mode, where you initially have to play through the Spanish campaign in order to unlock the other countries' campaigns, and the second being free play mode, where you're able to play as any of the 4 nations and set up your own custom games. The campaigns feature a predefined set of objectives and scenarios for you to complete for your Viceroy, and the game will end if you fail to achieve them in time, while free mode allows you to tailor the gameplay experience to your liking, offering a unique game every time you play. You're able to configure things like your starting funds, pirate frequency and battle difficulty in free mode, as well as your nation's size, distribution and hometown, and you can also choose to have objectives on or off. Now, getting into the gameplay then, we experience gameplay from a top-down perspective, where we get an overview of the Caribbean islands, and we basically move our viewpoint around with the thumbsticks and are able to zoom our perspective in and out. Selecting objects like ships or towns is done with the A button, while the Y button is generally used to direct our ships or open context menus, and once you get used to them, the game's controls are relatively straightforward. I felt that the mouse and keyboard controller mappings have been handled quite well, but there are a lot of different menus for you to memorise, so be prepared to be regularly pressing the wrong buttons for your first few hours. Now, in order to cover stuff logically, I'm going to break gameplay down into its 4 main categories, those being trading, building, objectives and combat. So kicking things off with trading, when you begin a new game you'll have control of your single hometown as well as a couple of ships, and your first port of call will be to establish some trade routes in order to start earning yourself some pennies. Each town in the game produces resources depending on the types of businesses built in the town, and the game's economy is dynamic, with prices rising or falling depending on the availability of goods at a town. You are able to manually direct your ships to towns, buying and selling resources at the town market, but you're really going to want to automate the process, which is where trade routes come in. Now, once you get your head around it, the game's trade route system is relatively easy to use, and it basically involves you selecting a bunch of towns, deciding whether to buy or sell each material at them, and then setting the order in which to visit them. Once the route is assigned to your ships, they will then automatically take the shortest route possible between each town, but you will sometimes want to modify the route to steer them away from any sea storms. Now, I completely screwed up trading in my first game, ending up with negative funds, which I found literally impossible to get out of. So to avoid this, you really do need to pay attention to how many goods your ships can carry, and how much they're actually earning from each trade route. Now, the second gameplay mechanic, which kind of goes hand in hand with trading, is town development, and this is important for increasing the power of your nation. Building and upgrading in Port Royale is pretty simple, with the game using a kind of hexagon based system, and you're able to construct a wide variety of buildings in your town, which are divided into two main categories: buildings which increase your town's population, and buildings which increase your resource production. Now, there is also an element of strategy to the building mechanics, as you'll need to have enough workers to operate your production facilities, but you'll also need to situate your buildings accordingly, as residential areas are positively affected by things like churches, taverns and hospitals, but don't like being next to the noisy production facilities. Unlike some strategy games where you're only able to construct things in your hometown, in Port Royale you're actually responsible for ensuring the prosperity of the whole colony, and you do acquire licenses to build businesses in other towns, and eventually can even take ownership of them. Moving on to objectives then, your primary objectives in the campaign mode can be found within your journal, and I found these all involve rather generic things like producing and delivering trade goods, constructing buildings or increasing your town's population. Each objective has a set date by which it must be completed and rewards you with fame, which is Port Royale's version of experience, and levelling up in the game grants you a token, which can then be used to unlock additional captains, buildings and ship types. Now, while juggling all the different gameplay mechanics, I often forgot about these objectives entirely, and so you really need to save your game frequently, as failing any of them will result in a game over. In addition to the main objectives, there are also a bunch of other optional objectives which do add some additional variety to gameplay, and these include things like resource requests which grant some additional fame, or random encounters which offer up treasure map pieces, additional resources or experience for your captains. So the final gameplay element in Port Royale 4 is naval combat. Now, while your standard shipyard can only build cannonless trade vessels, you'll eventually be able to upgrade to a large shipyard, allowing you to order armed combat vessels, but in order to form a battle fleet you'll actually need a captain. The rank of the captain determines how many vessels can actually be in the fleet, and captains gain experience over time which increases the rank, allowing you to unlock different perks with them which grant bonuses to the fleet. Now, unlike the other three gameplay mechanics we've talked about, naval combat actually takes place within a turn-based strategy view. Each turn you're able to move your ship using movement points determined by the vessel type, and ships are actually able to fire twice, once from each of the side-facing cannons. To spice the combat up a bit, you're also able to activate special abilities, which can really turn the tide of the battles, allowing you to instantly reload your cannons, heal your ships, or lay down burning patches of oil. Now, I personally found the combat mechanics to be pretty enjoyable, with a decent amount of strategy and planning required to defeat opponents, but if you're not really into the combat, you can automatically resolve battles based on each fleet's stats, though you will forfeit the opportunity to board an enemy ship and capture it at the end of the battle. So I've covered off the four main gameplay elements in order to give you an idea of how the game actually functions, but the gameplay mechanics of each of these do go deeper than what I've explained, and so you really do need to play the game in order to understand them all. Now, overall, I enjoyed my time playing Port Royale 4, but I do feel that it's really catering for a specific audience with its gameplay. Like most strategy games, gameplay is slow to begin with, which may put some people off, but it really begins to pick up pace after a couple of hours, and once you've got 7 or 8 trade routes on the go and several towns to manage, there's actually quite a lot to juggle, especially when trying to fulfill objectives. I remember playing Civilization 6 a couple of years ago, where a single game actually took me about 2 weeks to complete, and Port Royale 4 is a similar story, so if you like that kind of slow burning strategy game, then you'll likely enjoy this one. Now when it comes to any issues I found with the game, I'd say that my main criticism was with having to dip in and out of menus all the time, especially when it came to trading. I also found that my convoy's AI could be pretty dumb when it came to trading, with some only carrying a few materials whilst thousands sat in the town's warehouses, and my only other real issue would be getting to grips with all the different gameplay elements, which did initially cause a little bit of frustration. Initially, the game's complexity can feel quite intimidating, but in all honesty, it's actually simpler than it looks, and you'll likely have a good understanding of most things after a few hours of playing. Now turning finally to the visuals and audio, if you've been watching the game footage, it's clear that the visuals have had to be stripped back considerably in order to get it to run on the Switch. Despite this though, the game still suffers from frequent frame rate issues, which to be honest I've now come to expect from any PC port. Textures in the game are quite low quality and things like towns do look pretty rough when you zoom in close to them, but I was actually quite impressed at how well the Switch handled zooming in and out of locations, and the overall impact that the visuals and frame rate have on gameplay is fairly minimal, as you can pause the game at any time to perform actions, and the turn-based combat system doesn't rely on a solid frame rate either. Now on the audio side, things are kept rather simple, but everything does sound pretty decent. We get some nice ambient sound effects on the world map and a pretty chill soundtrack to listen to, and the battle sound effects are also pretty good with some nice meaty cannon booms. So in all, I thought that Port Royale 4 was a decent addition to the genre, and while it might not appeal to the vast majority of Switch owners, it's still a great option for fans of the genre. When it comes to my own personal rating of the game, I'm going to be giving Port Royale 4 3 out of 5 stars. If you enjoy a good strategy game and are looking for a rather relaxing one to sink a few hours into, then Port Royale 4 is definitely worth considering, though it does come with a premium price tag. And so that's about it for my review of Port Royale 4 on the Nintendo Switch. Don't forget to hit that like button if it helped you out. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on the game, and feel free to share your favourite strategy games down below. And if you've not already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as I upload detailed and honest reviews just like this every few days. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.